Learning a new habit can be one of the most challenging things that you can ever come across in life. However, James Clear goes on in Atomic Habits to prescribe new ways that we can actually adopt new habits and how to do away with the bad ones. And so in this video, I'll be sharing 10 key lessons from the book Atomic Habits that would eventually help you and take you a step closer to the attainment of your financial and several other goals that you set in life. This brings us to the first lesson, which is that small habits equals big achievements. James Clear goes on to say that one of the biggest reasons why people tend to fail in life or eventually they are not able to attain their goals is simply because they focus on the goals and not how or what they need to do in order for them to get to the goals. And so he chips in the concept of the law of the aggregation of marginal gains, which simply means that anytime that you set a goal, you need to focus on improving yourself 1% at a time. So ask yourself the simple question: what can I do in order to improve my skill set, my exposure, my knowledge by 1%? Because he believes that if you're able to master that, then you increase your chances of achieving your goals by 37%. And so that is what you need to master. You need to focus on making the small marginal gains and the small marginal contributions, which would eventually lead you towards the attainment of that bigger goal. So focus on what you need to do, breaking down every single thing into actionable steps that would eventually see you through towards the attainment and the pursuit of that goal. This brings us to the second lesson, which is identity-based habits. So James Clear goes on to say that if you really set a goal and you really want to achieve that goal, then ask yourself the simple question once again: who do I need to become in order for me to achieve that goal? And he believes that if you're able to assume that personality or that identity, it increases your chances of actually becoming successful in the pursuit and the subsequent attainment of that goal. For example, he goes on to say that if you have the goal of saving so much at the end of the year, then you need to tell yourself that you are a saver, or assume the identity of a saver, as opposed to you going to set a goal and saying that, oh, I have to save more this year. He goes on to prescribe that anytime that you have a goal, for example, if you have the goal of reading more books this year, ask yourself, am I a reader or am I going to read just books? So instead of you going on to just write down that I want to read more books this year, assume the identity or the personality of a reader. And he believes that if you're able to convince yourself that truly you are a reader or a saver, it increases your chances of actually going on to either read or to save more. This brings us to the third lesson, which is the habit loop. So James Clear believes that in order for anyone to become successful in learning a new habit, he's got to go through 4 stages, which is the cue, the craving, the response, and then the reward. He believes that if you're able to make the cue much more obvious and in the last stage, which is the reward, much more satisfying, then you would be able to achieve whatever goal or whatever habit that you set to attain at the end of the year. For example, assume that you're running a very busy schedule and then that day you've not had anything to eat. However, you're walking down a street and then you're able to smell the aroma of freshly baked pastries. Now you're hungry, so that is a cue. Obviously, that smell or the aroma coming from the bakery is a cue. So it actually goes on to prompt you. It triggers some form of response in your immune system, trying to convince you to get some pastries. Now, the second point is the craving. It is the desire for you to get a pastries to satisfy the hunger that you feel inward. Now, the third stage is the response. So the response probably would be that, okay, let me just walk in there and then get a couple of pastries and then eat. The last stage is the reward. And so at the end of the day, you've been able to buy some pastries, you've satisfied your hunger, and then that actually becomes a habit. So he believes that these are the basic stages or the stages that every single habit creation goes through. And then if you're able to make the cue, which is the first step, much more obvious or much more easy to identify, and then also if you're able to go on to make the last stage, which is the reward, much more satisfying, then you're surely going to repeat the habit in the near future. This brings us to the fourth point, which is the 2-minute rule. So James Clear believes that in order for you to become successful in learning a new habit, what you need to do is that you need to break the goal into actionable steps. So for example, if it is the goal of losing weight at the end of the month or at the end of the year, what you need to ask yourself is that, what can I do to make it much more easier? And then he suggests that break them into 2-minute actionable steps. For example, I'll tie up my gym shoes, or I'll put on my gym clothes. That would put you in a position towards the attainment of your goal, because once you're able to wear that, you'd eventually end up in the gym and then exercise. This brings us to the 5th lesson in the book, which is to make bad habits extremely difficult to learn, and then to make good habits extremely easy to learn. So James Clear proposes the concept of friction, which simply means that you need to increase the friction associated with any bad habit and then reduce the friction or the stress that it takes for you to learn new habits. So simply put, what you can do is that, for example, if you have the goal of reducing your weight at the end of the year, then you can put a bowl of fruit or healthy food in the middle of the kitchen where it's easier for you to see and eat, as opposed to putting junk food in the middle of the kitchen, or where you can easily have easy access, which would eventually lead you to becoming obese, which is inconsistent with the goal that you set to achieve. This brings us to the 6th point, which is to focus on systems and not motivation. So James Clear goes on to prescribe that the reason why people fail is simply because they focus on motivation. What their inner man actually tells them or dictates, that is what helps them to actually get the drive and to steer them towards the attainment of goals. What you need to focus on instead is systems, because motivation can fail. And so he goes on to say that if you have the goal of losing weight, you need to set specific days that you would go to the gym and the hours or the minutes that you spend in the gym. He believes that with a discipline would help you to learn new skills, help you to learn new habits, and then eventually take you a step towards the attainment of that goal. This brings us to the 7th point, which is to track the progress of the new habits that you've actually learned. So for example, in my case, I have the goal of shooting 100 videos and then posting them on YouTube. And so I have a habit tracker here. I've got a chart of 100 videos that I'm likely to shoot, edit, and then upload on YouTube. So currently, I've shot and uploaded 26 videos on YouTube. It is easier for you to track the progress of every goal that you set simply because you have a tracker here. And so currently, I'm able to ascertain that I'm 26% through with my goal of actually shooting, editing, and posting 100 videos on YouTube. It is easier if you track the progress of your report. So what you need to know is that anytime that you're learning a new habit, you need a habit tracker, which helps you to keep track of how far you've come and what you're likely to do in order to master that habit. This brings us to the 8th lesson, which is habit stacking. So what James Clear goes on to propose is that instead of you actually going on to learn new habits altogether, you need to attach new habits to already existing habits. So for example, after I brush my teeth, I'll floss my teeth. So that makes it easier because you know that come what may, you're surely going to brush your teeth. And so right after brushing your teeth, which is an existing habit, you actually go on to floss your teeth, which is a new habit that you're learning. This brings us to the 9th lesson, which is the Goldilocks rule. So what that simply means is that you don't have to set goals that are so far-fetched. And in a like manner, you don't have to set goals that are way below you. You need to find the middle ground and then find the balance. So anytime that you go on to set a goal to achieve a new skill or to learn a new habit, what you need to know is that that habit shouldn't be a habit that is so far-fetched. It should be a habit that is actually attainable. And then in a like manner, it shouldn't also be something that is too easy for you to actually achieve to a point where you don't have the desire or the need to even pursue it wholeheartedly. This brings us to the 10th and the last lesson, which is to never miss twice. And so it's easy, especially when learning out a new habit or a new skill, to commit all the necessary motivation and everything needed for you to keep going. However, when it gets to a point where you don't see the results, it becomes very, very difficult. And that is where James Clear comes in to advise that you don't have to miss twice. It's okay for you to eat junk food once a while. But however, when you eat that junk food, make sure that you resume back to healthy food, and that would help you and drive you towards the attainment of your goals, which is learning and adopting new habits.